Hello everybody, Peter here from the Esoteric Order of Gamers, and today something a bit different. We're going to talk about what are you going to do with your game collection when you die. Yes, this is one of these topics that I don't think anyone really talks about, but I just thought after I'd shown off my collection the other day, I was looking at it and I was thinking, and I've thought about this a few times, what is going to happen to this huge collection of games and miniatures and terrain and all this gaming paraphernalia that I've gathered around myself over a lifetime? And the reason I'm thinking about this, well, there's several reasons. Now, before I get started, I do want to point out that obviously this is probably a video for the older gamers among you. And I know there's a lot of gamers of relatively my vintage who watch my channel, and so it might be interesting to you. If you're younger, however, stay tuned because maybe this is the kind of thing you might want to think about later on. And we're also going to discuss the different phases of life when it comes to collecting and playing games. I saw someone mention the other day that a video like this one where there's an older guy like me just talking straight to the camera is a dad bod video. And I took offense to that. I mean, for a start, I don't have kids, so this can't be a dad bod video. But I will admit there's not a lot of flashy edits and close-up cuts and dramatic music happening and clips from films.
Game over, man.
It is just me chatting, but I hope you find it interesting because I really want to hear what you think about this topic, and get your comments below and let's all talk about this interesting topic. So why am I thinking about this stuff? Well, one of the reasons is that at the end of this year, I'm 60 years old. I can't believe it. 60. Yes, I'm approaching the big 60. It's a bit of a shock. And of course, when you get to this slightly older age, you start thinking about the future and what you're going to do in the time that's left here, which hopefully will be a long time. And of course, I have this room full of games. And actually, my partner and I have a huge collection of books as well, so this kind of stuff probably applies to that as well. The other reason is that my mother passed away recently, and that's both parents gone now. So going through that process has made me think about what it's like to have things and what happens to them after you pass on. And to be honest, I'm not crazy about the term pass on. I just feel like, we should just say die, because I think we should get more comfortable with the concept of death because it comes to us all. Passing on seems a bit kind of vague and wishy-washy to me, but that's a personal thing, of course. Anyway, I realised when going through, especially my mother's possessions, that these things are very important to us when we're alive and we attach a lot of emotional baggage to them. But for the people who are left, they don't necessarily attach the same weight to those objects. So, of course, this collection is incredibly important to me and every object has a meaning. But to someone who has to sell or distribute this collection, it's kind of just a burden. So I feel like we should think about these things long in advance so we have a plan for what we can do with these things and not actually transfer this burden onto someone else, probably a relative or family member. So let's quickly talk about, I think, the different phases of life when it comes to games. So when you're young and you're playing games, there are limits on how many games you can collect. Now, of course, this might just be personal choice. You might not want to have a large collection of games, but usually when you're young, you're moving from location to location, you don't have much money, and you don't have much storage space. So you tend to have a small amount of games with you. Now, of course, as you get older and perhaps you start a family, things like that, you might get more settled, you might have more space for games, but you might not have as much money. So as you get past that stage and you get into your middle years, you might have more money and you might feel the need to collect. Now, I think this collecting stage is also tied up with the idea that you want to get in touch with nostalgia again. Nostalgia becomes more important to you as you get into your middle and later middle years, I think, and you look back on items from your youth with this glow of nostalgia, and often you want to get copies of those things again. So, for example, I have items in my collection that have a lot of meaning to me. This one here is called Hey Hey Which Way. It's one of the earliest games I used to play as a kid with a neighbour and have a lot of fun with. I bought a copy just a few years ago because it had so many memories. I'm certainly not going to play it. It's just a silly roll and move game, but it has a lot of memories for me. This one here, Haunted House, probably goes back even earlier when I was a little kid. I think I had a copy of this in the 70s, and I think it did a lot to foster my love of thematic games, because here we've got a haunted house and there's ghosts. It's a super simple game, but it's got this 3D element and everything. So everything that I became obsessed with later on, which are games and miniatures games with terrain and everything, kind of started here with this game, Haunted House. Then, of course, there's the D&D stuff. Well, I started with the Holmes edition of Dungeons & Dragons. This is my original set. You can see it's completely and utterly beaten up. Now, I've often thought of getting a pristine copy of this edition, and then I thought, well, why? This is the one that I played with and I absolutely love. One of my great regrets is that I sold the advanced Dungeons & Dragons books I had from back in the day that I used to play with. Of course, I've replaced them since, but they're not the actual copies that I used when I was a kid. And there's something special about having the actual copy, even if it is completely and utterly beaten up and looks like a giant has sat on it. And then, of course, the holy grail for mini gamers, and that is original Dungeons & Dragons. Check it out. This is a 6th printing, and when I was in my collecting phase, which is past now, we'll talk about that in a moment, I really wanted an original edition of D&D, and I often thought, oh, well, this is 6th edition. Maybe I can get a 4th edition or a 3rd edition, or maybe the holy grail of a 1st edition. And then later on, now I just think, well, I don't really need that. I mean, it's great to have an original edition. It doesn't matter that it's the 6th printing. If you're talking about the Warhammer stuff, this is White Dwarf issue number 1. I have every single issue of White Dwarf from number 1 to now. They take up a lot of space, and to be honest, I don't go back and read them. And I've been thinking lately, as I've been thinking about this whole subject, whether I should keep buying White Dwarf or not. Maybe it's time to stop. Here we've got the original edition of Warhammer. This is the 1st edition. Never played this edition. I came a little bit later in on about maybe I played 2nd edition was when I started. And I was never a big player of Warhammer, the actual tabletop miniatures game. I played their specialty games more than their big games, but I had to get a copy of this, the 1st edition. So let's get back to those phases of life. Of course, the next phase is when you get a little bit older again, and you might start to think, why have I got all this stuff? Why am I collecting this huge amount of stuff? And you kind of realise, and this doesn't happen to everyone, of course, but you realise that living life is more important than collecting stuff. I think that making a collection, it definitely becomes part of your personality. It becomes part of who you are and how you like to project yourself out to the rest of the world. But when you get a bit older, you might think that that kind of thing isn't as important anymore. And I feel like also these phases of life are kind of related to how you think of yourself. When you're young, you're finding yourself, finding out who you are. In the middle, you're kind of defining yourself and you're saying, this is who I am. And when you get a bit older, you might think that that stuff isn't as important as you thought it used to be. Now, these are sweeping generalizations, of course. Everybody lives their life differently and everybody thinks differently, but it's just some thoughts I've had on the subject. So these items and many others have a lot of personal nostalgia for me, but what do they mean to somebody who is getting rid of this collection after I'm gone? Well, nothing much. The only thing that they mean is their value, what they're worth. So let's get to the subject of this video. What do you do with all this stuff if you have a big collection like me? Well, there are things that you think you'll do. The first thing is you think, well, I've got this amazing collection. I'm going to leave it to someone after my death. I'm going to leave it to my children or a relative or some person or a friend who absolutely loves games. And that's a nice idea, but there are some practical issues with that. I mean, first of all, does the person you're going to leave it to actually want it? I had an idea at one stage that, maybe I'll leave it to a niece or nephew, but none of my nieces or nephews are interested in these kind of games. If I leave it to a friend, that friend might be the same age as me and grappling with the same issues themselves. Now, I know I'm going to get a lot of comments under this video saying, leave it to me, leave it to me. No, sorry, I don't know who you are. You're not getting my collection. Forget it. Don't even bother. Don't even ask. So presuming you don't have anyone to just leave the entire collection to, and let's face it, that person also has to have a lot of storage room and be really into games and be prepared to take on this huge collection of stuff. Well, if you don't have someone like that, the next thing, of course, is to sell it. Now, I've been selling a few games recently just to make a bit of space here so I can get new ones in. And of course, selling games really depends on where you live. I'm way down here in New Zealand and there's a relatively small group of potential buyers. So even just moving to New Zealand from Australia, the value of my collection plummeted because there aren't as many people who are willing to buy these items and spend a lot of money for them. And of course, things have changed when it comes to selling games. Shipping is now a huge factor. It's very expensive and it's difficult to get items a long distance away to potential buyers. Now, presuming the poor person who is going to be the executor of your estate is going to have to sell all this stuff, it's going to be a particularly difficult task for them if they know nothing about games. And probably the easiest way to get rid of all this stuff is to get a specialised auction house to get rid of it for you. They come in, they appraise the whole thing, they might sell it in lots or they might sell it all as a big special lot, something like that. Of course, with any of these methods, you're not going to be getting full value on the games. There's going to be fees and charges involved, but that's a convenient way for the person who has been given this responsibility to disperse your collection. Alternatively, they could sell it themselves piece by piece, which is a huge job, let's face it, with a collection of this size. They'd have to put each individual item on eBay or Facebook Marketplace or something like that. Then there's the huge responsibility of shipping, to ship all those individual items, to pack them, to send them out. It's a very, very big job and not something I'd really like to burden someone with after my passing. So after all that, what's the best thing to do with your huge game collection after you die? Well, I think the thing is to take care of your affairs long before the time arrives. And that is, it's your responsibility, it's your collection. And I don't think it's fair to leave all that hard work to somebody else after you're gone. The question is, of course, when do you do this? Well, if you hearken back to what I said before, I think that when you get to a certain age, you start thinking about these things and you realise, whether because you're downsizing, going into a smaller house, or you just start to think, well, I've got too much stuff, that you might start doing it yourself. And I think at that time, maybe another idea is to kind of put aside the idea of what is this stuff actually worth? Is the value really important? Or is it better to get this stuff to people who are going to enjoy it? Some of this stuff is worth a lot of money. I mean, this original Dungeons & Dragons set is probably worth a bit. But I don't think it's really about the money. I think it's about passing on games to people who will love them as much as you did. If that's possible, if there's some way of doing that, I think that's a good thing to do before the responsibility devolves onto someone that you care about. But what I really want to know is, what do you think? Let me know in the comments below. I'm really curious to hear your opinions on this subject. Please don't bother with the whole I'll have your collection stuff. I know it's hilarious, but what I want to know is, if you've got a big collection of games, what are your plans for its future? And let's face it, we love these things. They're really important to us, and there's a lot of pleasure to be gained from these games. I've got to say, my collection's kind of special because a lot of it, all the miniatures are painted. There's foam core inserts. There's my own rules summaries in every game. It's a lovingly cared for collection, and I'd like it to go to people who love it as much as I do one day. But I'm going to have to think about that in the future and not leave that to somebody else to decide. Let me know what you think. I hope you've enjoyed this chat. I know it's something a little bit different, but it's a subject I was thinking of and I think it was worth discussing. Before I go, there's just one more thing I wanted to mention. If you do have a friend who suddenly decides to sell off their entire game collection and you don't know why, just check that they're okay. I had a friend at one stage who did this, sold off their games very, very suddenly. It turned out that he was very depressed and took his own life. And this is an extremely serious subject, but it can be a sign of people who are in distress if they decide to just suddenly get rid of all their possessions very, very quickly. So it's just something to keep in mind from my own life experience to, keep an eye on your friends and just make sure they're okay. Thanks very much for watching. I'll see you next time. Good gaming and live long and prosper.